Good morning. I'm Randi Wolfe, Executive Director of Early Care and Education Pathways to Success, better known as ECEPTS. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to Expanding Apprenticeships 2.0 and to thank you for making the time to spend the next 3 days with us. This is the second annual ECEPTS event, and the significance of these gatherings continues to surpass our expectation and imagination. In planning this year's conference, we hoped for 150 folks from California who were interested in working together to build on and expand what we began last year. In some ways, those expectations were met. The group we've assembled here represents ECE employers, workforce development agencies, higher education, philanthropy, policy, and advocacy. But what we didn't expect was that the registration would surpass 250, and that almost half of the participants would be from 25 other states and Washington, D.C. And we are so pleased to welcome you to this virtual gathering. This conference by design will focus primarily on work going on in California. But if there's one thing I've learned as a Midwestern transplant, it's that when it comes to bold and innovative initiatives, if you can make it work in California, you can make it work anywhere, with all due respect to the lyrics of a song that make a similar claim about New York City. And so I am confident that what we'll talk about this week, the challenges and the barriers we're trying to illuminate and tackle, the solutions we're testing and disseminating, will be widely relevant, practical, and useful. With that said, let me also announce our plans to host a national conference next spring, in person, at a hotel in Southern California. A conference that will bring national focus and attention to ECE apprenticeships, both in content and in attendance. More information on that will be coming soon. In the meantime, let's get started. Next slide. Now, before I introduce our esteemed keynote speaker, let me go over a few housekeeping items. We will be recording this session and all of the conference sessions, and links to the recordings will be posted on the ECEPTS website. Kim and I will address questions from the audience during the last part of the session. Participants will be muted throughout the session. To submit a written question, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your control panel and type your question into the Q&A box. And please include your name, organization, city, and state. If you have any technical difficulties during this session, please contact the phone number or email listed on this slide. Next slide. I am so pleased that Kim Johnson accepted our invitation to be today's keynote speaker. Built upon a long and diverse career focused on families and children, Kim is currently the director of the California Department of Social Services and the newly appointed chair of the California Early Childhood Policy Council. She has led the department since 2019, and for those of you unfamiliar with the size and complexity of our state, the California Department of Social Services is made up of 58 county-level child welfare departments. Kim came into her current position well-prepared and with eyes wide open, having spent more than 20 years working in the social service system, in public policy on behalf of resource and referral agencies, in the community college system working on providing ECE mentoring and parent services, and at the county level working on behalf of children and families. Importantly, woven throughout Kim's career has been a fierce commitment to social justice, equity, and poverty disruption, and an unwavering love of children. And beyond the details of her resume, as you'll see in a moment, Kim is a warm and engaging woman who leads with confidence and purpose. She is determined to make a difference and is unafraid to continually expand the reach of the difference that she will make. Please join me in welcoming Kim Johnson.
Thank you so much, Dr. Wolfe. Randi. Appreciate this invitation and very much being here, and the enthusiasm and the work that you've done. I just really want to acknowledge in this space has been critical. My favorite part of your intro right there was the love of children. And I can tell you that every day, those are my best days. And it's been even greater fun to see some of those that I work with. As I imagine some of you right there out of the audience have your little ones next to you right now as we've all continued to adapt. So as a grandma now, it's even greater. So really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning. I am going to start, I think, with what's on top of mind, and always starting and leading with our collective ability to address inequities. And so I want to name and acknowledge yesterday's conviction of the police officer who murdered George Floyd, and the collective sigh of relief this provided to some. But just minutes before this verdict was announced, Ece Bryant, a young Black teenage girl, was shot 4 times and killed by the very police officer she was seeking help from due to an altercation. So, you know, as we go forward in our work, and as we address inequities, and as we together work to build the community that we want to live in, we have work to do. And today I will, throughout these opening remarks, speak to those historical inequities we need to address, systemic racism, and the role that government and all of us play in truly coming to a reckoning in this space. And early childhood and the child care and development programs and services are no exception to that history. I want to also just start, and I welcome people as we have now lived through a tremendous year, and thoughts and wishes to all out there participating today, and recognize that some of us have lost loved ones due to the pandemic, and we've all experienced this together. So as I share with you some of the impacts of what we've seen here in California, I do, welcome you to take those deep breaths and care for yourself in all things, as we need all of us to be healthy and well and bring our best energy as we move forward in opportunity. So just again, some data and some numbers about what we've experienced and how that's going to move us forward in terms of opportunity. As of yesterday, April 20th, in California here, we've had over 3.6 million confirmed cases of COVID-19, resulting tragically in the loss of over 59,800 lives. Of those who have tested positive for COVID, Latinos were far more likely to have higher rates of infection than any other ethnic group, as well as that loss of life. In addition to all the health impacts we think about with the pandemic and recovery, obviously there's also been devastating impacts to the economy and those living in poverty. And the systemic inequities, again, that create disparities for people of color have been heightened and continue. And here again in California, more than 6 in 10 Latinx and Black women in California live in households that lost earnings during the pandemic. The COVID-19 recession was the first recession in which more women than men lost their jobs. And again, it was Black and Latinx women and women who are immigrants who had especially high rates in the early months of the pandemic in job loss. Again, to look at the magnitude of the event in economic terms, California's unemployment rate literally from February of 2020 at 3.9% rose to 16.4% April. So in terms of health and who it disproportionately impacted, and in terms of also the economics of the situation. And of course, our children, our babies, our little ones. Certainly many of us, and those again who had families, and also for our school age children, right, had this very quick, abrupt shift to distance learning. But of course, again, not all households and children were equipped with the tools that would make them successful in that environment, including things like laptops, internet connectivity, a quiet space to engage as they tried to work with this new environment. But also what we know, and as of course social services, what we saw in terms of referral, home is also not always the safest place for all kids. In terms of the childcare and early learning landscape and the pandemic, it was fascinating being part of we have what's called the State Operations Center, where many and most of the leaders across California's government were together. Very long days, really working to address the immediacy of a number of issues. defining who is going to be essential workers and be able to continue to engage. And of course, right here, critical core to, again, the ability for our healthcare professionals and our first responders and others who we needed to be engaged at a whole new level in this experience and pandemic. Right there, front and center, we have the workforce, our early learning, our childcare and development workforce, who were essential and were building those bridges and allowing for those different career first responders and people to engage and do what they needed to do. I also just want to lift up, I'm grateful to have the thought partnership of people in that time and every day, right? Like the Surgeon General, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, who talks and understands the early childhood system as one of the buffers to adverse childhood experiences. So all of this stress that all of us, but again, especially those families have been experiencing, this ability for the essential workforce, the childcare and development workforce, the early learning workforce, to be there and be that buffer for families has just been tremendous, a tremendous gift. We've seen at the Department of Social Services, who of course also licenses programs, we had some flexibilities that were granted early in the pandemic, and we saw a lot of pop-up, we characterize as pop-up programs, almost 1,000 pop-up programs, in fact, again, to meet the needs. By and large, over 66% of those pop-ups were temporary increases to capacity for licensed programs. So maybe it was a small family child care home getting the ability to operate as a large, serving up to 14 kids, or maybe it was a center who wanted to expand their capacity. But we also know, while we were successful and continue to try to transition some of those programs in terms of that increased capacity or becoming licensed, we also know that we lost quite a bit of the workforce in programs across the state due to this pandemic, and have a real job ahead of us and in front of us in terms of recovery in this space. We put in a lot of different resources over the last year, hundreds of millions of dollars, in fact, and again, in partnership with additional relief we received from the federal government to get through the pandemic, everything from the personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, hand sanitizer, et cetera, but also in the policies and the work, looking at stipends for recognizing the workforce and what they were doing, having emergency vouchers for greater access, looking at reducing family fees and ease some of the administrative burdens for both families and providers. And so those are great things that we did going forward. But when we look at this event in totality, no matter, again, if we're talking about economic health or what this workforce and families have experienced, as someone recently said, it's similar. They liken it to a tremendous storm that we have all just gone through together. But we weren't all equipped with the same boat, the ship. Some of us had ships, some have had rowboats, some had life vests, some had nothing at all. And that's, again, where, again, the inequities we must think about in terms of how we're addressing recovery, how we've been approaching the investments that we've had in the field go forward. And of course, all that being said, and what we've experienced, there's tremendous opportunity looking ahead. I will say I appreciated Dr. Wolfe's opening there in terms of the background that I have in preparation and coming into this position, which I am humbled and grateful for. I will tell you that they didn't say there'd be a pandemic in the first and early months and experience of the directorship. And gratefully, I would say that certainly all of us are still working on exactly the areas that we've signed up to work on and to go forward with together. But we do have tremendous opportunity here in how we are rebuilding recovery and moving forward together. I want to start by saying some of that opportunity is the federal partnership. So please, if you haven't been tracking this, please do. This is part of our ability to really, again, recover and go forward and go innovate. And I'm going to get to specifically some things in apprenticeship and the workforce in just a moment. But in addition to some of this COVID relief and the American Rescue Plan with the President Biden and the Harris administration, just earlier this month, $39 billion in federal child care funding was released to states. We have a president who has another plan to invest in his own budget $400 billion in what he calls the care economy, including this workforce. $400 billion in the care economy. He recognizes, understands the importance of child care and development programs, and estimates a $3.2 billion gap in how we can address infrastructure and facilities and our neighborhoods in terms of what we have in communities to support. So this is tremendous. And we also have some phenomenal relationships and great California leadership throughout this administration. And I would say that as I turn now to some opportunities in California and some of the work that we're doing going forward, right, we have to recognize people like our current Secretary of the Labor and Workforce Development Agency, Secretary Julie Su, who has just launched with the administration and a work group, the Future of Work Report, really also, again, focused on things like livable wage, compensation, engaging the workforce in terms of the goal frameworks and how we're moving forward together. And she will be joining the Biden administration shortly. So those are going to be key connectors for us as we look to these opportunities. We also, most gratefully, I have been, as Dr. Wolfe mentioned, in the field for a while. I started actually transitioning from working in the K-12 space to the early childhood space, had some phenomenal opportunities with great mentors out there in so many of the positions I held in early childhood and family support. And just have lived now decades in the nonprofit sector prior, right? Waiting for an administration and a governor who got the importance of early childhood, who understood the economic impact of the child care sector and workforce. And we're here, everyone. The Governor Newsom understands it. I've had just tremendous conversations with him in this space where we don't need to level set. He knows it off the top in terms of the importance of the investment here, how we need to move forward. And so that's just tremendous in terms of having that leadership at the state level and of course at the federal level. So Governor Newsom, of course, is the governor who has signed the bill for collective bargaining for all of the family child care providers and programs across California. We are in the process of transitioning the child care and development programs from the Department of Education to social services, leading with recognition and importance of the whole sector as a critical importance, not just to help families engage in the workforce, but also the critical importance of the child development opportunity for our kids, again, as they are recovering and the loss of learning and attendance and engagement they've had over the course of this last year. We also, of course, in addition to the Future of Work plan that I mentioned, right, have developed the master plan for early learning and care, really focused here on a number of ways that we need to kind of take, right, we had the Assembly's Blue Ribbon Commissions, early childhood priorities and recommendations. These are things that many of us have worked years on in terms of what we know we need to do to ensure that this workforce is prepared, compensated, has these opportunities to truly give what is just a life gift to children and families in terms of their developmental trajectory and their life outcomes. So this master plan, I'll spend a little bit more time on, especially as it relates to our topic today. There are a number of different ways and goals throughout the plan of how we're proposing to move forward. But in terms of the goal to really think about incentivizing, supporting, and funding career pathways, the master plan proposes a few different ways of how we get there. One is really making sure that we have a comprehensive professional learning system that supports multiple pathways for early learning and caregivers and professionals. Some of you, even years ago, I worked on this in a different hat and different capacity, the career lattice. What are the ways in which we are setting forth kind of no matter where you're entering or beginning in this sector, that you know you have opportunities for upward mobility and can go a number of different pathways in terms of both caring directly with children, but also in terms of other places within our infrastructure that are needed, home visiting, working in some of our First Five programs, et cetera. It also speaks to how we are looking at improving higher education pathways, a place again that I want to acknowledge the tremendous work that's been done in this space, curriculum alignment projects with community colleges, and a number of other spaces where we're looking at building on the existing credential programs in higher education, but really thinking about those opportunities on both the permit matrix and the actual degree attainment opportunities of how we're looking towards an early childhood credential and expanding those opportunities across the state. Of course, strengthening and looking at quality improvement for workforce development. And again, no matter where someone is entering the space and no matter kind of what type, provider type they are or program type that they are, how are we thinking about creating additional opportunities in a number of different ways and modalities to engage in this? And apprenticeships, again, is a key component of this. And then the final how we get there in this particular goal area is establishing and sustaining financial supports for workforce development. And here's where we are specifically calling out professional learning opportunities, stipends for coursework, tuition reimbursements, funding for cohort models, and apprenticeships. So again, as we look to the master plan in the transition for social services and the Early Childhood Policy Council and a number of other spaces, and then we look at implementing these. Again, the master plan looks a decade ahead. So it's a 10-year on the horizon. And of course, again, we have to recognize and acknowledge where we're starting from based on the experiences of last year. But we want to engage with you as we look forward to implementing some of these recommendations to really dig in. It was a lot of the work in the master plan was done from a research base. And so we also want to, again, take the best of that best practice with what you all are telling us. Again, want to lift up apprenticeships here and how they are beginning, right? This is how it's working. This is the opportunity that we have. And here's how we need to engage and come together to actually create and implement and operationalize some of these recommendations. So that is our plan in terms of how we're going to use that plan in moving forward. We will be back engaging with you to look ahead. So more specifically, in terms of the work of the early care and education pathways, and I've had the opportunity in a prior hat with the Department of Social Services to talk with Dr. Wolfe and others about the apprenticeship programs that have been established across California and how they are taking the opportunity to leverage and blend and braid various funding streams. In some place, right, it's the, there used to be a program called the TANF Careers, or CalWorks Careers projects through community colleges, where it's looking at providing that opportunity and that early childhood pathway for those who are CalWorks participants. How are we looking at CalFresh, employment and training, federal dollars that are coming into communities to, again, further go forward? Subsidized employment, right? We have a lot of fund sources, right? And that's our job at the state level to try to also ease, again, the ability for you at the local level to blend and braid these funding sources. Head Start dollars, right? Another place where there's been additional investment at the federal level to come together then and create these opportunities. And so it's been just wonderful to learn more about how those partnerships are coming together at the local level. Again, we've been talking about these things at the state level. In my former hat as the CalWorks branch chief with the department, right? We were sitting, and we continue to now, with the Workforce Development Board, with the Labor Workforce Development Agency, with the Community College Chancellor's Office, with the Department of Education, where we're being intentional about thinking about the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act and what components do we have? What are the changes we want to make in our CalWorks program in terms of being more outcome driven and making sure career pathways lead to those livable wages, those economic mobility opportunities. So again, those conversations are happening at every level at this point of government, but also in communities. So please continue to lift those examples up to us. I always say at the department, I say that we are mindful of whose babies we are also developing. We know that some of the projects that the department is responsible to then actually bring to scale across the state are things that started locally. That innovation and that partnership and those building those bridges together has been the beauty and success of so many projects across the apprenticeship programs. So we look forward to more of that in that space. Again, I just want to kind of double down on how the department goes about its work and how we see this work continuing, and that is we are leading with addressing inequities. The Office of Equity has been established in the Department of Social Services in 2019. I'd say kind of just in time, pre-pandemic, to help us be intentional about the policies, the program design of everything we're doing. And we have, as part of one of 12 other state departments in what's called the Capital Cohort, been part of the Government Alliance for Racial Equity as effort, which is speaking to why are we leading with race? There are many other inequities we must address, sexual orientation, gender identity, accessibility, reasonable accommodations, there's so much more. We are leading with race because, again, some of the systemic infrastructure, the structural racism components that we know are prevalent that we have to address and be intentional about as we're going forward. So again, grateful to have established that office pre-pandemic that allowed us to create some of the first of its kind in the nation programs going forward, Project Room Key for those experiencing homelessness, our ability to stand up new data infrastructure in the childcare space quickly, those kinds of things. And again, that data component is also critical in the how we're doing business. We've created a chief data strategist position at the department, and that was also done around the same time. So as you are all working in your communities to look at the outcomes of your apprenticeship models and what you still need, please do bring us that data. Show us how it's impacting, what the outcomes you're seeing, and also, again, where the systemic barriers are that we need to address at the state level to make sure that you're successful. Equity, data-driven, and engagement. This is we want to engage with you. Please, we are available to you as, again, you are trying new things, you're identifying places that need to improve. We're here to engage as we're moving forward. So I know we're going to have some opportunity for Q&A. I will stop here, but just want to pause with tremendous gratitude for each of you and all that you are bringing to not only the workforce and the children and families across the state and further, but also for all that you're doing for each other and for yourselves as we embark across a tremendous opportunity. The time is now for us to see what we can do to move forward in this particular space in early childhood career pathways. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim, for all of the information and inspiration that we need and that this moment deserves. As you will see, many of the remarks I'm going to make reflect and align with many of your thoughts and priorities. As they say, great minds work alike. Thanks, too, for calling me Dr. Wolfe. It's not necessary, to be sure, but it makes me smile. So now that Kim has given us the big picture, it's my task to talk about ECEPTS, this conference, and the challenges and opportunities that bring us together. Next slide. In thinking about how to best use this time, I settled on 3 goals. Next slide. My first goal is to present fresh information and not talk about those topics that others will cover throughout the rest of this conference. Next slide. Second, I want to articulate key questions, persistent biases, and misinformation that I confront almost daily in conversations with funders, policymakers, researchers, college faculty and leadership, and workforce development leaders. Next slide. And last, I will endeavor to hold out a bold and aspirational vision for this conference and for the underlying hopes and dreams that this conference represents. So by way of sharing fresh information, let's begin with a quick update about ECEPTS and what we've been up to since our statewide convening last February. Next slide. Sadly, when we think about the past year, the obvious first question is, how did the pandemic impact ECEPTS in terms of program implementation? Because many of our programs were in the startup phase of development last spring, the impact of the pandemic on our ability to move forward was enormous. The ECEPTS program that was best able to function despite the hardship caused by the pandemic was the Early Educator Apprenticeship at the YMCA of the East Bay in Alameda County. As a large and well-organized organization, the YMCA had the experience, infrastructure, resources, and ingenuity to adapt to the situation and continue to offer on-the-job training and related supplemental instruction to more than 125 apprentices. You'll be hearing more about that during the panel presentation by the YMCA apprentices that comes after this session. But most of our programs ended up postponing their start dates, and in some cases, postponing and then postponing again, and then postponing yet again, as the impact of the pandemic became obvious and ongoing. So the ECEPTS partnerships tried to make lemonade out of lemons and used the time to focus on partnership development and consolidation, program planning, design, and revision, outreach to new employer partners and funders, and creating outreach and recruitment plans for the cohorts that will launch this coming summer. Next slide. This chart provides an overview of the ECEPTS projects we expect to launch over the coming year, or have already launched. Most will launch over the summer, assuming a return to some level of normalcy by fall semester. As you can see, we are currently working in 6 counties and sponsoring 5 apprenticeship programs. We anticipate enrolling between 250 and 300 apprentices over the next 4 to 6 months. In addition to providing ongoing support and technical assistance to the ECEPTS apprenticeship programs, here are a couple of highlights related to our overall organizational development. We have now registered the ECE Associate Teacher Apprenticeship and the Home Visitor Apprenticeship with both the United States Department of Labor and the California Division of Apprenticeship Standards. We successfully created a new apprenticeable occupation in the national database for early childhood educators, which means lead teachers, head teachers, master teachers, and the like, and registered the program with the DOL and the DOS. We redesigned and expanded our family child care apprenticeship program and will register that with the DAS next month. We also increased our government relations and advocacy efforts and expanded our visibility around policy and systems change. We launched the ECEPTS website and began developing our social media presence. And yes, that means I will finally learn to tweet. Next slide. As the leader of a fast-growing organization deeply engaged in work that is receiving a lot of attention at the moment, I'm frequently turned to as someone who can provide insight and analysis around a variety of issues. Some of these issues are ones that the ECE community has been grappling with for decades, like the impact of low wages on the ECE workforce and the children served, and the barriers ECE workers face in pursuing higher education and degree attainment. Other issues, like how to create successful apprenticeships for non-traditional sectors and female-dominated sectors like Head Start, family child care, and home visitation, are still somewhat novel and an outgrowth of the system building underway in the workforce development arena. Still others, particularly around funding and sustainability, fall into the policy and systems change arenas. I welcome these conversations as an opportunity to inform an array of stakeholders who are trying to make real change and long-lasting progress. But navigating those conversations can, in order to recast incorrect assumptions and challenge biases and misinformation, can be tricky. To illustrate, let me highlight 3 examples that seem both widespread and timely. Fair warning, these issues are complex and thorny, but because of time, I'm going to run through them fairly quickly. If you're interested in digging deeper, please join me for the session I'll be leading tomorrow, when we'll be able to have more of an in-depth conversation. Next slide. I often hear comments that seem to suggest that there's something magical about apprenticeship. It's like we found the golden ticket, the shortcut we've all been searching for. And to the extent that that misconception may open doors and open funding streams, I'm willing to entertain it. But in doing so, I also try to set the record straight. It's true that the apprenticeship model is a very useful and very effective approach to ECE workforce and professional development. But apprenticeship is a means, not an end. It's not magic, and it cannot magically address the myriad barriers and challenges involved in creating viable ECE professional development pathways. Similarly, given the low wages associated with ECE jobs, especially at the entry level, it's significant that registered apprenticeships must compensate apprentices for on-the-job training and increase that compensation as they move through the program. But even though compensation is embedded in apprenticeships, widespread scaling of ECE apprenticeship programs will not solve the wage issue that cripples our industry. Because apprenticeship is a tool, not a policy. The bottom line is this: in pursuit of addressing the systemic obstacles and inequity often reflected in ECE professional development initiatives, apprenticeship has certain advantages and has had very promising results in terms of retention and program completion, but it is not a panacea. Indeed, there is no panacea. We must stop looking for quick fix solutions and that new and shiny object that will be cheap, fast, and easy. The big picture issues we're facing require systemic change. There are no shortcuts, and systemic change is expensive, slow, and complicated. Next slide. I find it exciting and promising that childcare is being called out so prominently as the administration articulates and promotes the Infrastructure Act. And I'm sure many of you have been equally delighted simply because we're being included and recognized in a way that is so long overdue. And I'm pleased about that as well. But I'm concerned that the focus is on childcare as a service because it's essential to the economy. It's essential for the economy to function, because parents need to go back to work, and because children need to have a place to go when that happens. What concerns me is that they're only talking about childcare, not early care and education. They're not talking about the value of early learning experiences in terms of later school success or social emotional development. They're not talking about the significance of the ECE workforce as workers, as heads of households, as women of color, as immigrants, and so on. And that concerns me because I worry that the focus will once again be on the industry, but not on the people who make that industry possible, not on the wages they deserve, the working conditions they need in order to thrive, and the essential contribution they make to society that deserves to be honored, respected, and reflected in their compensation. So let's embrace the fact that we are in some sense included in the infrastructure conversation, but let's keep our eyes wide open and be prepared to stand up and speak out to make sure that we're not overlooked or taken for granted. Next slide. Many of you have heard me talk about this issue. It comes up in discussions about high road training, which is often code for jobs that pay pretty well without requiring extensive training or degrees. It comes up when folks bemoan the difficulties of engaging women in apprenticeship programs, and yet they continue to ignore or undervalue female-dominated workforce sectors. And it comes up when funders and policymakers want to focus on so-called quality jobs, the measure of which is primarily in terms of earning capacity, and the definition of which rarely includes the notion of essential workers, or jobs that yield high levels of personal satisfaction, or jobs that make significant contributions to fostering the greater good, or jobs that can provide an on-ramp to better paying jobs down the road. But here's the bottom line. The economy of this country relies on the institutionalized exploitation of ECE workers and other care workers to avoid paying the real costs of that care. The industries that comprise the care economy rely on a female workforce, a workforce that is predominantly women of color and immigrants, and a workforce that has little to no collective voice or political influence. In other words, our society and our economy can get away with underpaying and undervaluing those who sustain the care economy because of institutionalized sexism, racism, economic oppression, and the oppression of immigrants. And if we're ever going to tackle the underlying issues that make it impossible for early care and education to be a secure profession that offers family-sustaining wages and excellent working conditions, we're going to have to be honest about the root issues and stop pretending that policy tweaks and impressive pilot projects can provide long-term solutions. Next slide. Lord knows that we could construct a long list of policy priorities, all of which would be important and necessary, and good things would come out of our efforts. But in the spirit of identifying those actions that would yield the greatest and most enduring impact, I would propose two interconnected issues that should be prioritized and attacked like a dog with a bone, ferociously, with single-minded purpose, and with no let up until we fully succeed. I should mention that the issues I'm about to discuss are those we're grappling with in California. I recognize that many states have addressed these issues, at least partially, and have made impressive gains. So I ask your indulgence as we dive deep into the stormy California waters in which the ECE industry swims. The first of the two interconnected issues is to establish an ECE teacher credential. Without a teaching credential, ECE will always be a second-class citizen in the cradle-to-career education continuum. Without a credential, those who teach and care for young children from birth to age 8 will never earn what their peers earn by teaching 3rd grade or 8th grade or high school, because their academic preparation will always be viewed as inferior. To be clear, it's not that a credential is somehow important in and of itself. If the K-12 system decided to do away with credentials and in favor of master's degrees, for example, then ECE could follow suit. But as long as credentials are the holy grail of teacher preparation, we deserve to play by the same rules and reap the same benefits. There's a lot of support for an ECE credential, and there has been for a long time, and it is increasing as time goes on. And there are many models across the country of states that have successfully implemented such a credential into their teacher preparation system. My understanding is that when all is said and done, one of the persistent obstacles to developing an ECE credential with the same weight and credibility as the multiple subject or single subject credential is perceived objection on the part of teachers' unions, which confuses me because I came from Illinois where there was a full-fledged ECE credential and no opposition to it on the part of the teachers' unions. So I want to put out an invitation. I will meet with anyone from any union to engage in a sincere and solution-oriented ongoing conversation aimed at understanding and resolving this issue. But the conversation won't be about why can't we have an ECE credential. It will be about what do we need to do or change in order to create an ECE credential that has support from the unions. And this issue leads us to the next priority. Fundamentally, we have to address the wage issue, which in part will require ensuring sustainability of the ECE industry, including workforce development. It's not rocket science. Here's the situation. The ECE workforce deserves the same pay, the same job security, and the same professional respect and political influence as K-12 teachers. K-12 teachers would never have gained the pay, job security, and professional respect and political influence they have without unions. And personally, I don't see how we can get where we need to get to in terms of making real and binding progress on permanently addressing the wage issue without organizing this workforce. But the fragmentation within the ECE community is going to make that a particularly complicated and challenged undertaking. That's not a reason to do so. And while we're talking about this, let me dispel one myth real quick. There is sometimes an argument that says it's okay to continue to increase the professional development requirements of ECE workers because once they have things like college degrees, it will translate into higher wages. But we have plenty of hard evidence to show that, but we have plenty of hard evidence to show that it doesn't really work like that. The K-12 system could not survive on privately funded pilot projects, short-term state-funded grants, and the like. Although private schools exist, the majority of K-12 schools are funded by public dollars that are baked into the state budget. Why would we expect the early childhood system to survive, much less thrive, without an equally strong and reliable commitment to funding it with public dollars? And let me be clear, in all of this, I'm talking about the entire ECE system. Family childcare, infant and toddler care, Head Start and state-funded preschool programs, transitional kindergarten, all of the early care and learning that is provided in homes, in community-based settings, and in schools. I know that I've said a lot here and that all of these issues require much more discussion and debate, but for now, we're going to leave it there. Next slide. I would be remiss if I didn't take a minute to thank the funders who have supported and enabled ECEPTS since its inception 2 years ago. We literally couldn't have done this without you. And I want to thank the Irvine Foundation in particular for their vision and commitment to helping ECEPTS grow from a one-woman consulting project into a sufficiently funded, widely respected, independent organization with the resources and the team needed to succeed. I also want to thank the speakers who will be sharing their time with generosity and wisdom over the next 3 days. Each of these speakers was handpicked by the conference planning team, and not one person that we invited turned us down. We truly value our relationships with each and every one of you and we look forward to watching you in action throughout the conference. And now, before we turn to Q&A, I want to make sure that everyone is fully aware of what's in store. So I'm going to quickly run through the conference schedule. After a 15-minute break, today's next session will feature a panel of ECEPTS apprentices who will share their apprenticeship experiences, discuss the merits of apprenticeship as a means to professional development, and address questions from the audience. Next slide. During lunchtime, we hope you'll give your eyes a rest, grab something to eat, and take a break. Next slide. After lunch, you'll have 2 workshops to choose from. In this workshop on creating early educator apprenticeships, you'll hear from panelists that lead ECEPTS initiatives across 4 counties that are in various stages of development and implementation, a community-based organization that operates a large Head Start program, a resource and referral agency that sponsors an apprenticeship for family child care providers, and 2 community colleges about to launch and lead degree-driven early educator apprenticeships that are integrated into their college programs. Next slide. The second option during that time slot after lunch is this workshop on funding ECE apprenticeships, at which you'll hear from 4 panelists who come at funding from very different perspectives: a program officer at a private foundation, the executive director of a countywide First 5 commission, which is public dollars, funded by public dollars, a leader in the California Community College Workforce Development Department that focuses on funding and supporting new and innovative apprenticeship programs, and the vice president of a large community-based ECE organization with extensive firsthand experience in identifying and accessing funding for ECE apprenticeships. Next slide. Tomorrow morning, we'll begin with a provocative fishbowl conversation about the issue of implicit bias. How does it sneak into programs and policies, even when managed by well-intentioned leaders and institutions? How does it impact bias? How does implicit bias impact students, program participants, families, and communities? 4 women of color who are also thought leaders and committed to social justice will grapple with this critical topic, sharing both personal and professional experiences and perspectives. Next slide. Then we'll get to hear about ECE apprenticeship programs from 4 states: Pennsylvania, Kentucky, North Carolina, and Rhode Island. Programs that work with different ECE subsectors with unique histories and important lessons to share. During lunch, we invite you, next slide. During lunch, we invite you to join a virtual table in our virtual ballroom and engage in conversation with a small handful of other conference participants. Choose a specific topic or just choose a random table. More specific details will be given at the start of that session. After lunch, you'll again have 2 options. Youth apprenticeship has become a hot topic. In this session, we'll look at the national landscape around youth apprenticeship. How is California approaching the development of a statewide youth apprenticeship system? And you'll hear about youth apprenticeship programs in 3 counties in California, all focused on careers with children and families. Next slide. This next session was not one that I proposed, but my staff seemed to agree that this was an important session to offer, and it looks like they were right. So bring your questions, concerns, excitement, and curiosity to this frank and informal conversation with me, where, like I said, we'll be able to do a deeper dive into the various issues that I raised in my comments. Next slide. We'll kick off Friday morning with a focus on important policy discussions. Even though community colleges have robust academic programs in child development and social or human services, few are integrated in a meaningful way with campus career and technical education programs. With presenters representing care economy disciplines as well as CTE, this session will explore the question of how to bridge the divide. Next slide. And in the last session of the conference, 4 California workforce development leaders will engage in a fishbowl conversation about ECE apprenticeships, barriers to funding, delicate policy issues, and the interface between the world of ECE and the world of workforce development. This is a session that will provide a unique peek into the minds of folks who have insight and opportunity to fight for real and lasting systemic change. Next slide. At the end of that session, we'll take about 15 minutes to hear final thoughts from presenters and participants about conference highlights, significant takeaways, and where we're hoping to go to move forward around ECE professional development, apprenticeships, public policy, philanthropy, and higher education. So with that, let's turn to the audience and see what's on your mind. Whoops. Let's see. Okay. All right, and I think there are questions waiting for me in my, let's see. Okay, here we go. The first question comes to us from Lynn Lucas. I don't know where that person is from. I apologize. I don't have the thing in front of me. The question is, what are your thoughts about programs like Teach Wages and how they can address the issues you've talked about, even as a stopgap as legislations and unions take hold? So I assume this particular question is to me. Kim, are you going to spotlight Kim, and can you spotlight me and Kim as we're doing it? Great, thank you. Okay. You sort of answered your own question. I think those programs are excellent. They're excellent models of pilot or of, of really pilot programs, even though some of them have been institutionalized across the state. But they're not going to solve the real problem, because until the funding sources are embedded in the public funding system, we can't count on it. Years ago, I did a project with people from, I think it was North Carolina, but I could be wrong, and ways they had used the ARA dollars after the Great Recession to advance early childhood workforce development. And they had this whole network of really great programs and policies and ideas. And I was so impressed, and I was taking fast and furious notes. And at the end, the person said, of course, this could all change with the next governor. I said, what do you mean? Or with the next election? I said, what do you mean? She said, well, the governor's up for re-election, and if we get a new governor, we start from scratch. That's what has happened to us, state by state, generation by generation. We have to get to a place where we're not blowing the wind in that way. Kim, you want to add to that?
No, I agree with you. I'm familiar with some of those programs that were started up with the ARA dollars back in the day, and other kind of wage supplement and augmentation programs. I agree with everything you said. I think, just in terms of some of your other remarks in the space, we also have a financing, I think, to the points that you're making, a financing issue, right? And that's a big piece of, I think, the evolution of the program too, in terms of both investment at local, state, and federal levels, but also in terms of the conversations around affordability and what families can afford to pay, et cetera. We really, it's critical for any sustained efforts in some of these spaces. So I appreciate your response on that question.
Great, thanks. And actually, I realize now I can see the Q&A box just fine. So we don't need to, my team doesn't need to be texting me. So we only have a few. So I think we have time, and we have a lot of time. Okay, good. So if there's more questions, we can answer those as well. The first question comes from Nadia Taylor. She says, I work at a community college in the Bay Area. What are some of the challenges you've seen with beginning apprenticeships through the colleges? It's such a big question, and it's such an important question. I'll throw out a couple, and Kim, you have your own perspective on this, I'm sure. So if it's okay with you, I'll start, and we'll play tag team. Let's see, where do I start? There are many challenges. The community colleges, especially or particularly in California, represented a vital resource and system through which to operate and offer early educator apprenticeships. One of the challenges is that child development, and whatever that program is called on a particular campus, is often not seen as part of the career education world. And so they're not even, sometimes I talk to child development faculty who don't know how their community colleges' strong workforce dollars are being spent. They don't know the people in career and technical ed. The people in career and technical ed don't know them. So that it's the silos in the community college system and the way all of that has played out that becomes a barrier. And so I end up telling the child development folks, you got to get known. You got to develop relationships. You have to be very visible. And we have to explain over and over and over again. It's funny, early childhood ends up being a square peg in two round holes. We're not completely welcomed in the education space for all of the reasons we've been talking about, but we're not completely welcomed in the workforce space because we're seen as teachers. And so we go back and forth on that. And so all of us who are trying to advance these programs need to see ourselves as ambassadors in whatever system we work with. That's number one. And number two is, as with other things I talk about, the funding that California colleges, that community colleges receive is fleeting, changing, unreliable. And sometimes colleges have their own particular pet projects or priorities, and we're competing with them. So all of that comes into play. And I would say one of the things that's part of that is, and again, we have to face this over and over and over again, is that a lot of times at community colleges, as well as at workforce development boards, we will do a presentation, they will love what we have to say, they will be so excited that we're reaching women and women of color and so forth. And they will say, but you don't pay enough. We could start a program for, cybersecurity or advanced manufacturing. And by the end of the apprenticeship, folks can be making $50, $60 an hour with 6 months of training. And we have to have responses to that. And I hope some of the comments I gave gives you a sense of how you can respond to that kind of thing. Kim?
Yeah, I think I would just add on there, I think some real life experiences when I was working in Solano County as a local planning council coordinator working in child development programs, right? This was in the early days of the CARES initiative, for those of you who are around, comprehensive approaches to retaining educational standards and workwear, acronym. Long story short, part of the initiative, and it was actually true even in the Bay Area community college places, is that we had to fund positions in the career and counseling centers of community colleges that were specific to early childhood, because what we knew is that if you came into the counseling office, typically of any other profession, that the counselors would not necessarily know what the pathway was. They would not necessarily know how to help you navigate that. And so we actually had to fund positions focused on that, and some of those I'm sure still exist. So I think that's kind of case in point. And, I think to your point around how then in the community college system, how is so their lab school still, right? So some of the interactions and how they think about their larger initiatives in pathway work is critical to your point of really making sure you're championing and being part of those conversations and showing the importance of this particular field and workforce. I think the other thing I'd say is that, again, former hats as an advocate for over a couple of decades in the field, right? We often, when that budget drops, may revise, it's just a few weeks away here in California, right? We go to the early childhood pages as advocates, but do we also go to the career workforce pages? And do we look for those opportunities and synergies and intersections for connection around making sure we're making the case? There's another, in addition to, right, you heard me talk about the infrastructure investments and also, right, the future of work, right? That's a these are huge opportunities. And you heard me mention also those connections at the state level of where we're trying to make that much more intentional for early childhood. So I think those are absolutely the opportunities, and we have to make sure we're broadening our lens and looking for those partnerships.
Great, thanks. Kim, this next question is for you. It comes from Kathleen White here in our Bay Area. She says, thanks for always bringing your insights and humanity to our conversations. Please comment on the viability of our California early childhood mentors pivoting to start functioning as journey level apprenticeship mentors. Is this an emerging role for this critical and historical program that's exiting the California Department of Education system?
Well,
I realize this is a very California question.
Yes, it is. Yeah, and I actually, so yes, for those of you who know, I used to work for the California Early Childhood Mentor Program. So good memory, good question. Yeah, I mean, what I would say is this, I think that, and I've had, some really great conversations actually with a number of different folks around mentorship more broadly in the field. I can't imagine, any person in any field who's had those opportunities for mentorship, for shadowing, apprenticeship, again, being a model here, who didn't find value out of it. Even when your mentor or your apprentice, even when you see something that you're like, well, I wouldn't quite do it that way, right? I mean, these are valuable gifts to have that opportunity to reflect and engage in terms of your own practice. And so I think in terms of the California Early Childhood Mentor Program and as it exists today, and opportunities to think about leveraging that and thinking about broadening opportunities around apprenticeships. Glad to continue that conversation. I will say, right, it's an interesting time right this moment as we sit here in April. The transition doesn't occur till July. So we aren't, that transition will occur, and we have obviously been engaging with communities over the past year of working towards the transition. And again, certainly want to build on the tremendous work that's been to date. But I think these are the kinds of conversations we hope to have with you to see what those opportunities might be. Good.
There's a question that asks, it's going to take a 1 minute it's just a clarifying question, but then the people from out of town will understand, or out of the state will understand better. She asks, to clarify that the ECE teacher credential is different than the credential I was talking about. So just really briefly, in California, we have a system of, it's called a permit matrix. So we have a system of child development permits. The CDE is equivalent to what we call our associate teacher permit. And we actually have a letter from some years ago from the US Department of Ed, confirming that, because California doesn't tend to use the CDA. I'm sorry, anyways, that's the short answer. You can email me more if you want. The credential I'm talking about is one that would be absolutely the parallel to a K-12 or a K-8 or a K-5 or a high school teacher credential. Okay, now back to, I wanted to clarify that. The next question, Kim, I'm going to throw it to you first, and I'll see if I have anything to add, okay? It comes from someone in Kansas, and so it give us more of a national perspective. Has there been any success in shifting the perspective away from viewing childcare as a service and or advocating for providers to seek higher wages? We have many providers who are afraid to increase their fees for fear of losing enrollment.
Yeah, no, again, appreciate this question. And I think your remarks actually hit on this quite a bit. I mean, absolutely. And this goes back to kind of how I started in terms of addressing inequities. It is absolutely true. When you look at the history of kind of caregiving in the workforce, again, if you even look at the trajectory of the K-12 workforce and who historically has been in those positions and how they got to be where they are today, I think these are lessons learned that we have to think about. To all of the points about the workforce, about the individuals who show up. I mean, I would say, as I say, the time is now, the opportunity is now. I mean, look, if you don't, out of this pandemic, understand the importance and value of a family child care provider, an early learning teacher, I mean, I think that the pandemic, in a way, right? The idea that you lost that access, the idea that you were to, as a mother or a father, try to figure out how to navigate what your child's doing, maybe working from home. I mean, it's tremendous. And I think that value, right? And back kind of to the comments I was making about who are we defining as essential workers, right? It's critical. I mean, you cannot debate. It's not debatable to think about the importance of the early childhood professional and the value and what they bring for not only, again, like I said, the life outcomes for the child that they're serving in terms of development, but also in the connection to the family. I mean, we have been, many of us across all places, and again, especially those who are experiencing poverty, have been very isolated. And, one of our early decisions, even in the pandemic, as we were thinking about issuing these emergency vouchers, right? We said, well, let's not only do this for those who are these first responders and essential workers, but we also have to do it for the families in crisis, experiencing homelessness, experiencing maybe for the first time, issues with the child welfare system. So the stability and continuity and developmental opportunity that this field brings to a child and a family is unlike no other. And so I think we need to shout that from the rooftops. It's not debatable. And again, you have an incredible opportunity right now in terms of thinking about this with administrations at state and federal level, and hopefully also in Kansas, that are really ready in addressing this issue from that perspective. And so I think it's the time to really think about making some real bold and significant changes in this space.
And thanks, Kim. And the thing I would add is that last part of her question, where she said providers are afraid of raising fees for fear of losing enrollment. This can't, the winning the battle to address this what I keep calling the wage issue, it can't rest on the backs of the parents who are accessing the childcare system. Again, to draw the analogy to the public school system, people have the option of going to private school and then they pay, although there's even, changes around that. But by and large, parents don't pay for public school except through taxes, of course. And so I wouldn't think that providers, as it is, parents are strapped, especially for infant and toddler care, or if you have more than one child in care. So that can't be the source of the solution. So that I just wanted to sort of address that one little piece of her question. Okay, here's a really big question, Kim, and it is all yours. And it comes from someone who I will just tell you is one of the journalists who are present at today's event. If the goal is to get ECE teachers, or I would even broaden that to say ECE, workforce, which is broader, it's people who care and teach, but okay, to have the same recognition as K-12 teachers, what's the rationale for moving all the ECE programs and so forth out of the Department of Education and into the Department of Social Services?
Yeah, appreciate that question very much. And a few things I'll say right off the top is that, so social services cares about education. And in fact, we have billions of dollars that we're responsible for that really is about career pathways and educational opportunities for those we serve. Like that is one of our core functions. So let me start there. The second thing I'd say here is that there's the partnership, right? All of these things, whether we're talking about credentials and the partnerships with the Commission on Teacher Credentialing, whether we're talking about kind of trajectory of children through the early learning system to the K-12 system, right? These things absolutely require us to be intentional in connection with the Department of Education. So we had been doing that pre this transition, and of course we will continue to do it post. Of course, state preschool, and I think to Randi, your earlier comment, right? State preschool, transitional kindergarten. In terms of 4-year-olds in the state of California, that's the population that we are closest to supporting and achieving in terms of having them have an opportunity that is supported through investments and that they don't have to pay. But I would say, so that's a place we're going, but the partnership between the Department of Education, Social Services, and just the broader workforce systems, again, kind of core to our business at Social Services. And of course, we will continue and strengthen our connections with the education department, but also again with the other infrastructure, the community college system, the higher education system, chancellor's office. Again, all of these components fit together and are part of the partnerships that we've developed to establish economic mobility opportunities for whomever we serve. And so certainly fits within our scope and will be a focus of ours. And again, you heard me say, I think hopefully, right, again, I've been in the field a long time. So hopefully we've gotten past the concept that social services only cares about this as a work support. We social services are in charge of disrupting poverty. And if we don't understand the importance of education on that path to poverty disruption, right, it's critical. So it is absolutely fundamentally the dual goals of the early learning system that we're focused on. And again, understand the tremendous richness and importance of education and child development on again, a lifelong outcome and trajectory for children. So I appreciate the question and the opportunity to address that.
Great, thanks. We have 2 more questions we're going to be able to get to. And both of us talk very quickly. I'm sure we can do this. One I will take, and then the other will go to Kim. So the first comes from Tennessee, and she says, one of the reasons the K-12 career and technical ed connection to higher ed ECE programs is weak is because they're bound to promote programs with living wages, which ECE programs do not always demonstrate. Do you have examples of larger scale ECE employers who are stepping in to support and build a better pipeline with on and off ramps to related sector careers? There's a lot in that. Let me see if I can just pull out a couple of those points. The first is I remember one of the presidential debates when there were still a lot of people on the stage, and I was listening to them talk about something, and I thought to myself, someday they're going to list early childhood in their list of whatever. And within moments, somebody, I don't actually remember who it was, said this amazing talking point about, and let's not forget the people who work for childcare, and we need to raise their fund. And I remember going out loud, sitting by myself on my couch going, oh my God. So part of the answer to this is this thing about we don't pay living wages and therefore we're not going to talk to you, or we're not going to fund you, or we're not going to, support your efforts. I think it's mostly an issue of changing public impression and public perspective and all that, which is to say, that's been the myth that because we don't pay well, that sort of closes doors. And what I've been saying, and people have heard me say this, because we don't pay well is the reason we need to link arms and build a broader coalition so that the workforce development world, the unions, the early childhood world, teachers of older children, all the natural allies come together to say, we have to fix this problem. We can no longer, we can no longer be satisfied with less than living wages, never mind good wages. So it's a battle to fight, and it's a battle to say, no, that's not the end of the conversation. That's the beginning of a separate but related conversation. And within that, we also have to change people's perspective. And you can see how this is going with the infrastructure bill. They would mention childcare, and they always link it with elder care, which is a whole nother thing I didn't want to get into today, but that's okay. But then they got bolder and bolder. And then there have been, if you look on the web, there's all kinds of articles saying care is part of infrastructure. Care is part of infrastructure. And very soon, that's not going to have to be said over and over and over again, because it's going to become part of how we think about this. So that's what I mean, that part of this is engaging in public education and changing minds and hearts about what is the real issue and how do we actually solve it. That's one point. The second question that you're talking about, larger scale ECE employers. That's an interesting question, and I think it's a problematic question, because no employer or no, Head Start or other, statewide or countrywide programs can individually solve this problem, because it would mean they're dipping into their own particular funding sources or their own particular political context. And that's part of the issue, is that doesn't work, and it's not sustainable. It's not necessarily sustainable. So I don't have that kind of example, but I'll tell you the example that comes to my mind. When Head Start as a national organization decided that 50% of the teachers across the country, the lead teachers across the country, had to have BA degrees, that was an important step, because it lifted everybody got impacted, because that was now the new standard. The problem, of course, is it didn't come with a pay thing. And so we have stories in California, people went $40,000 in debt to get their BA so they wouldn't lose their job, and they had a 25-cent an hour raise. So there's a problem with that, but it is a really good example of what can happen when some entity with enough visibility and influence says, we're doing this different and we're doing it now. And I think we all want to be part of that next wave of that kind of attitude. That's my answer on that. So the last question, Kim, for you, it's good that the infrastructure bill keeps coming up. It's from Adele Burns, who works with apprenticeships here in the Bay Area. As you consider the possible infusion of capital from the infrastructure bill, do you think that it will be subsidizing what families are currently paying for out of pocket? Or do you envision that it will actually lift the wages of those in the early care sector, or both?
It's a great question. I'd say that, this administration has been investing in infrastructure in a number of ways, and have proposals on the table right now for consideration in this space. And, what I would say that I know about the budgets and the margins of a childcare business and operator is that it's, heavily personnel. It's the staff, it's the people, right, who make all the difference in terms of the cost and kind of the business model. And so while that's true, everything else then matters. And so I think to any ability for us to invest in infrastructure, capital investments, these kinds of things will ultimately support the overall ability to think about wages and other ways to invest in the budget. So it's an all relief thing, but I would say alone, I don't think that that's going to be the game changer, if you will, for the wage conversation. I think again the differentials we need to make up, and I think to your points, Randi, on compensation and where we are and where we need to be. We have a ways to go, and again, I think have set out some areas that we need to address to get there, and the financing is a larger issue. So it'll help some. It won't be the thing that changes, I think, the ultimate compensation levels of the workforce.
Great. So on that note, I hope that those of you who are out there listening have found this interesting and stimulating and informative. I hope you can also see why we feel very, very fortunate to have Kim in the position that she's in. And we will continue to build this partnership and this relationship. And I hope you all have a wonderful conference and that we will see you in the coming sessions. And with that, we're going to take a 14-minute break. And just to be clear, you all should have an email from this morning explaining to you how to get to the next session. But I'm pretty sure you have to go back to the website and log in. You don't just stay on this window. So thank you. And that's it. We're done. Thanks, Kim. Thanks very much.
Appreciate it.
Okay.